Well, welcome back to our family worship lesson. Today, continue to look at God's steadfast love, His patience, His faithfulness to His people, as we find it recorded in Exodus 13 and verses 17 to 22. And to get us grounded, I want to look at those verses and read them for us. It says there, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea, and the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. And so today, thinking specifically about how God is patient with His people in the midst of their weaknesses. And we talked about that last time we were in Exodus, how in verse 17 you could kind of see different ways, you see one of the ways at least in which God shows He shows compassion for His people in their weakness, recognizing it and accommodating their weakness. So that brings us to this concept, which I read from the ESV translation. The King James captures it better, I think, this idea. The King James uses the word long-suffering. I like that word when it comes to God's dealing with His people, as it kind of implies or shows more clearly the idea of God waiting patiently and enduring, in a sense, in the midst of the sins of the people. And so you can look at different passages of Scripture that bring this idea of long-suffering out for your children. For example, you could go to Psalm 86, verse 15, Romans 9, verse 22, or 1 Peter 3, verse 20. And you can have your children read those verses in turn, or you could read them to your children. It doesn't really matter. Sometimes having them read along keeps them engaged and it helps them participate in the lesson. But you set those things before them to establish this principle of God as long-suffering. And in the ESV, the translation will be patience. Instead, like I said, I like long-suffering better. And then from there, after you've established that principle, you can come back to Exodus 13. And in verses 17 to 22, God really establishes four major ways in which compassion is shown, or in which His long-suffering with people is established. And the first one we touched on last time we were together, when it talks about the different route that God provides, that the people of Israel would not be overcome with fear when they see war. But then we also see that in verse 18, the people of Israel go up out of the land equipped for battle. So even though He accommodates them in their weakness, He does provide them with what they need for their journey and for their protection. In verse 19, you see the long fulfillment of this promise of Joseph being taken up out of Egypt when the people were led out of the land, and that dates back to Genesis 50. I think it's verse 20, somewhere around there, where Joseph makes his brothers promise to bring him up. And then finally, you see God's mercy and His compassion, His long-suffering in demonstrating to His people His nearness through the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. And so those are four very practical ways. There are many more throughout Scripture, and you can take advantage of others that you know. But in our text are four specific ways in which God's long-suffering is established by condescending to the weakness of His people and by showing Himself near to them. And that's a great comfort. It should be a great comfort to your children to know that God is near, to know that God is not a God who is far away, who is distant. So set that before them. Make sure they are confident in the presence of God. Teach them to be oriented towards Him, to pray to Him, to live their lives for His glory. And as you do so, lead them by example. And so that's the lesson for today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. So God bless you.